Another new Stephen King update that I wanted to preview on this channel. So let's begin. The story begins in October 21st, 1958. A car manufacturer plant, namely Chrysler, Plymouth, was basically making lots of cars at that time. The vehicles were seen as 1957 Plymouth Furies. Some of them were actually white, but only one remains in a different color, a bright red one with a white roof. She doesn't have a name yet because we only see this vehicle in the beginning of the film with Bad to the Bone playing in the background. The red car actually slams its hood directly onto a mechanic's hand while working on the engine, then chokes the other mechanic while inside of the vehicle. The movie now takes place in 1983, just about 24 years later. A young football player named by the actor of John Stockwell actually arrives to Keith Gordon's house, namely the character Arnie Cunningham, who is basically the youngest of all teenagers who basically lived a miserable life. Shortly after, while at school, Keith Gordon, being a young age at that time, was basically being bullied by a group of gangsters led by William Ostrander as Buddy Repperton. The main focus of this movie was basically all about obsession and love. Shortly after getting Buddy and his cronies out of school and expelled from the school, Arnie and Dennis were just driving home when suddenly Keith Gordon sees a battered Plymouth Fury, the very same red vehicle that was seen in the beginning of the film. Keith Gordon is surprised by the vehicle and adores admiration towards it. However, John Stockwell seems a bit concerned considering the vehicle doesn't even look straightforward. And in fact, an old man by going the name of George LeBay comes up towards the young Keith Gordon and said that the vehicle's name was called Christine, and in fact, it was named after a woman of the same name. The young Keith Gordon actually now owns and buys the car, but his parents were not joyed with it and saying that the car needs to go away, considering the fact that the car is a bad influence because of the strictness of how his parents reacted. But Keith Gordon disagrees with the options and decided to keep the vehicle anyway. The young Keith Gordon takes the old broken muscle car down to a garage owned by Will Darnell, the garage owner. And in fact, the old man actually agrees with Arnie's decisions on letting him keep the car, just as long as he works in the garage. Shortly after the restoration process is finally finished, Alexander Paul and Keith Gordon kiss during a baseball game at the school with the newly reworked up Christine. John Stockwell accidentally gets a football injury during the game by getting tackled by the other team. Arnie is surprised by this and asks if the young football player is okay. The jock actually admits that he was a bit surprised that he managed to fix the vehicle all by himself. However, Arnie doesn't seem pretty much convinced since he doesn't know anything about how exactly fast that he was able to restore the car, as it would only take a few weeks and a few hours just to get the vehicle running. However, during a drive-in movie theater moment, Alexander Paul chokes behind the passenger seat after realizing that she was not really much a meat eater but is a herbivore kind of person, and later almost chokes to death in Christine's passenger seat, locking Keith Gordon outside of the vehicle. The angered Alexander Paul asks the young Keith Gordon to get rid of the red muscle car because of it was believed to have been jealous. The young Keith Gordon replies with a no, saying that the vehicle had nothing to do with it and was only pretending to be seeing things. However, Alexander Paul ignores young Keith Gordon's replies and said the vehicle needs to go away anyway. A very confused Keith Gordon asks if the vehicle was actually cursed to which the vehicle doesn't reply but only managed to start up once he managed to sweet talk it like it was a real person. Shortly after taking the vehicle back to the garage, Buddy and his gang enters the garage by trespassing into the property just shortly after Keith Gordon left the area. They begin damaging the car by ripping all of its parts right off, from rooftop to wheels. Shortly after the wrecking was done, Keith Gordon and Alexander Paul return to the garage, but only to find Christine in a messed up state. Alexander Paul asks Keith Gordon what exactly happened, but however, she only gets surprised as Keith Gordon angrily snaps at her, believing that she was the cause of the car being destroyed and battered. Believing that his parents were also to blame, Keith Gordon angrily yells at his parents, believing that they were also the cause of the destruction of the car. However, his parents become really upset with him and asks if he was okay, but then he angrily snaps at his parents yet again, but this time more forceful and more viciously, choking on his dad. Later, after being angry and blaming his parents for what he has done, Arnie returns to the garage and vows ultimate vengeance by going after the destroyers who wrecked his car, to which Christine complies with agreement and promises him that she will be the one to do it because she has been in the garage for so long and wants payback as well, and shows Keith Gordon what she can actually do by regenerating right in front of him, to which really surprises him in fulfillment. During nighttime, Moochie was just walking home when suddenly Christine appears right in front of him. Moochie asks Arnie if he was alright because he was a bit apologetic at first, but then Christine replies with anger and rage, charging towards the young man at high speed. Christine later corners Moochie behind the wall and crushes him to death with her front bumper. Shortly after the previous attack, John Stockwell is now discharged from the hospital, but is confused to see that Arnie's car is okay. The John Stockwell character decided to ask Keith Gordon what exactly happened, and Keith Gordon replies, "Moochie is dead," believing that someone must have killed him last night. John Stockwell becomes shocked and terrified, realizing that Keith Gordon must have something to do with it, but Keith Gordon replies with "I don't know," because he believes that he didn't even do it, believing that it was someone else. Shortly after the next night of the encounter, Buddy and Don Vandenberg take a drive towards Trelawney's gas station. However, they were soon assaulted by Christine, who angrily smashes into Buddy's car. Buddy becomes enraged and dares the Plymouth to come and get him, but this angers Christine further. In a fit of rage and fury, Christine drives straight towards Buddy's car yet again, crushing Don with the vehicle's frame. What makes matters worse is that Christine lights up a match and blows the gas station into complete oblivion, killing Don and Trelawney inside the vehicle's building. Buddy becomes extremely terrified now as he runs for his life, but he doesn't realize that the Christine car is still after him. But still, with the reality of vengeance, Christine doesn't let Buddy go that easily and burns him alive by firing NOS bottles directly at him, killing him immediately. Alexander Paul and John Stockwell become more and more concerned as Keith Gordon was now being possessed by the vehicle and plans to stop it with a tractor. Later that night, Dennis and Lee decided to put an end to the miserable life that Keith Gordon was being possessed by the murderous vehicle. However, they don't even realize that the possessed car was already there, as she attempts to fully attack them. When they tried to talk Christine down, they realized who exactly was driving her. It was Keith Gordon himself, but unfortunately, due to driving so fast and so recklessly, the Keith Gordon character was suddenly thrown out of the vehicle through the open window and later dies upon hitting the wall with his head. Keith Gordon later dies, but Christine becomes more enraged and plans to take out Alexander Paul and John Stockwell in the process. However, the vehicle loses to a bulldozer fight match, to which the bulldozer easily wins because of its powerful presence. The vehicle later begins losing its power and then gets crushed to death as a cube. The movie ends with Christine barely able to move as she said, "I'm not done here yet, I'll be back." And then the movie soon cuts to black. So what I obviously previewed about this movie is that it's actually quite good in the most terrifying and yet possessive way. Thank you all for watching. Make sure that you go comment, like, and subscribe. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!